Everything changed the moment the CEO recognized the face in that faded photograph, realizing the poor single mom sitting across from him was not who she seemed. He froze mid-sentence, heart thudding against his chest, as the realization threatened to rip apart everything he thought he knew about his own past, his company, and the life of the woman whose resume he had just scanned. She had arrived at that gleaming corporate tower hopping to land a job that could keep her electricity on for one more month. She never imagined her very presence would ignite the memory of a buried family secret, one capable of shaking the entire foundation of the organization she sought to serve. And in that moment, mired in stark fluorescent lighting, seated in an ergonomic chair that was more expensive than her entire month's rent, her survival instincts clashed with the unstoppable force of truth, and neither she nor the CEO could unknow what was suddenly laid bare. She was a single mother, struggling daily just to keep her child fed and clothed. No father in the picture, no support system, no reliable income. And he was a commanding presence, a billionaire in custom-tailored suits, his life measured in deals brokered, fortunes made, jet flights taken. Neither should have had a reason to cross paths, let alone stare at each other with alarm crackling like electricity in the air. But there they were, two universes colliding in a silent storm of recognition because of a mysterious connection that defied all logic they knew. He first saw her in the company's glass-enclosed lobby, a little after 7:00 a.m. on a Monday. Morning sunlight filtered through the soaring windows, catching in the polished marble floors. He'd arrived early, a habit ingrained in him since childhood, determined to keep a rigorous schedule. The last thing he expected was to see a figure he'd noticed in the corner of his eye, shifting uncomfortably, with a thin manila folder in her hands, hair slightly disheveled, eyes darting around the place as if it might swallow her whole. He guessed she was waiting for the HR department to open its doors, or maybe she was lost. A gentle frown crossed her face as she checked a battered phone screen for the time. She didn't look like the usual applicants who breezed in, dressed in meticulously pressed suits and with bold self-assurance. Yet there was something about her that made him do a double take, an air of quiet determination. She looked as though she was prepared to move mountains with sheer will if she had to. He stood behind a structural column, observing, which was unusual for him. He wasn't a man who typically lurked, but there was something unspoken that urged him to take notice. Was she desperate? The intangible sense of urgency that clung to her shoulders suggested so. The lines on her face seemed etched by worry beyond her years, and still there was a quiet grace in her stance, a refusal to buckle under the world's weight. Eventually, one of the receptionists arrived. He saw the woman approach the desk, exchange a few words, and disappear into an elevator with a timid nod. That should have been the end of it, he told himself. Still, he found his thoughts returning to that woman all morning. Countless phone calls, countless emails, board meeting prep, everything demanded his attention. He had no time for random curiosity, yet his mind's eye conjured her face over and over as though he'd seen her somewhere else, though he was certain he hadn't. He was sure he would remember someone like her. He tried to let it go, but it was almost as if destiny set its hooks in him, and no matter how many times he brushed it aside, it pricked at his consciousness. Then near noon, as he strolled past the HR corridor on his way to an important executive briefing, he saw her again, stepping out of one of the interview rooms. The door softly clicked behind her. She held that same manila folder, except now it was pressed flat against her chest like a shield. She looked anxious, uncertain. She took a deep breath and started toward the exit sign at the end of the hallway. He should have simply continued walking. But before he could analyze the impulse, he diverted his path in her direction, intercepting her steps near the corridor's water cooler. Startled, she stumbled slightly. "Excuse me," he said, voice calm but his curiosity piqued. "Are you all right? You look a bit," her cheeks flushed. "I'm fine, just a bit nervous, I guess." "Interview?" he asked, glancing at the folder. She gave a tight, polite smile. "Yes, for a junior administrative role, just trying to get my foot in the door." "It's a big place," he nodded, trying to project warmth without intruding. "It's a good company." "So I've heard," she replied with a trace of irony. "I'd be grateful just for the chance." He scanned her for any visible name tag, but she had none. He extended a hand. He paused. He usually introduced himself as the CEO, but something stopped him. Instead, he said, "I'm Daniel." She took his hand gingerly. "Daniel, I'm Ava. Nice to meet you, Ava." Her eyes flickered over the expensive watch on his wrist, the crisp nature of his suit, the posture that screamed confidence. She looked away as though embarrassed by something, maybe her own worn blouse or the one scuff on the toe of her old flats. He sensed her discomfort and tried to diffuse it. "Anyway," he said, "best of luck with the position." Her expression softened. "Thank you, Daniel, I really appreciate it." She turned to go, but something stirred inside him, an odd compulsion to say more. His chest felt tight, almost as though he was on the cusp of discovering something crucial but intangible. He opened his mouth to speak, but closed it again, shaking off the irrational feeling. That afternoon, in an executive meeting about a prospective merger, Daniel tried to keep his concentration on the spreadsheets and bar graphs splayed across the table. Vice presidents droned on about synergy, cost savings, and expansion potential. But every so often, his mind drifted back to the woman with sad eyes and a stoic posture, hugging a manila folder against her heart. He didn't understand what kept drawing him back to that memory. The city was full of single mothers, job seekers, and countless people in need of a stable career. Yet there was something unique about this woman, something that made it impossible for him to erase her from his thoughts. Was it empathy? A reminder of times long past when he too had known something akin to desperation. But that was decades ago. He'd been a child. He told himself it was just a momentary human connection. He'd probably never see her again. By the time evening shadows stretched along the marble floors, Daniel was still in the office, poring over emails. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving the building in near silence, lit by artificial fluorescent light. His phone buzzed with a text from his personal assistant. Just emailed you a new hire list. Take a look whenever you can. He clicked on the attachment. The HR manager had recommended a short list of potential hires for various open roles. 7 names. A spike of adrenaline coursed through him when he saw the name, Ava Cooper. She had apparently made a good impression. Without thinking, he tapped out a reply. Schedule a final interview with Ava Cooper on Friday. I want to sit in. His assistant answered within seconds. You want to personally sit in. The position is entry-level. He caught his reflection in the glass window. His expression was set, eyes brimming with a seriousness that surprised even himself. He typed back, yes, please finalize it, thanks. That Friday morning, he sat in a small, unassuming conference room typically used for group interviews. He felt oddly unsettled, as though bracing for something intangible. File sat in front of him, containing Ava's resume, references, and background check. He glanced through it. Standard college education, a few odd jobs, caretaker stints, nothing out of the ordinary, no glaring red flags. But then a subtle detail snared his attention, her date of birth. He couldn't say why it made his breath quicken. He just realized she was exactly 30, coincidentally the same age as, well, it was a coincidence, right? He shook his head, pushing away any irrelevant thoughts. Needed to remain professional. The door opened and the HR manager walked in with Ava. She paused when she saw him, eyes widening in recognition. For a beat, an awkward silence reigned. A fleeting look of panic crossed her face, as if she'd suddenly realized the friendly Daniel from earlier in the week was actually someone far more important. He wondered if she felt misled, but there was no time to dwell on that. He gestured to a seat across the table. Have a seat, Ava. Good to see you again. She mumbled a greeting, obviously taken aback. The HR manager initiated the formalities, asked a series of standard interview questions. Ava answered politely, her voice trembling slightly at first but growing steadier as she gained confidence. She explained her experience with administrative tasks, her strong organizational skills, her desire to learn and grow. She emphasized her ability to handle multiple responsibilities, particularly relevant as she juggled jobs and single parenthood. Daniel's eyes watched every nuance of her face while she spoke. She had a sincerity that was impossible to fake, that intangible something that radiated from her. The quiet strength, perhaps, made her stand out in a sea of applicants. He could almost see the fierce determination beneath her humble demeanor. He asked a few questions, and her answers came from the heart, unpolished but strikingly real. She showed more than competence, she showed grit. When the HR manager had finished, Daniel closed the folder. I appreciate your time, Ava. We should have a decision for you soon. Her shoulders relaxed, and a small hopeful smile curved her lips. Thank you, it means a lot. Their eyes met in that moment, and the entire room seemed to hang in suspension. He felt it again, an echo, a resonance, something swirling at the edges of his mind. He could see her swallow, visibly trying to maintain her composure under the weight of his gaze. Then she stood up, carefully clutching her folder. The HR manager shook her hand politely, and so did Daniel, though when their palms touched, a weird flash of warmth jolted him. She left. The moment the door closed, the HR manager turned to him, perplexed. You seem very interested in this one. Care to share? He cleared his throat. She's got potential. Let's give her a chance. The HR manager didn't argue. After a few more pleasantries, Daniel found himself alone in the conference room, running a hand over his face. Something about that handshake, that fleeting contact, had stirred a memory, but it slipped away too quickly to fully register. On Monday morning, Ava returned for her orientation. She arrived early, wearing the same worn blouse, freshly ironed, but obviously well-loved. Daniel, in his top-floor office, told himself not to interfere. She wasn't his direct report, and he had a busy schedule. Yet throughout the day, he found himself checking with the admin team, gleaning little bits of information. She's catching on fast. She's quiet, but she works hard. She mentioned she's a single mom, so she might need a flexible schedule. Is that okay? he made sure they accommodated her. He told himself it was simply because he recognized her potential, that he didn't want to lose a promising employee. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He was drawn to her narrative, her struggles, her perseverance. And there was an unsettling feeling that, somehow, she was significant to him in ways he couldn't yet understand. She began to settle into the daily rhythm of the company. She'd juggle phone calls, schedule meetings, manage data entry. By day's end, she was often worn out, but her face glowed with relief that she had a steady job at last. She chatted politely with coworkers, ducking out exactly on time so she could pick up her child from daycare. Once or twice, Daniel found excuses to pass by her desk. Whenever he did, she seemed flustered, as though unsure how to act around him. She tried to keep it professional, but the undercurrent of tension made every interaction charged. He sometimes caught her looking at him with a question in her eyes, one that neither of them voiced. About 2 weeks later, the final puzzle piece fell into place. Daniel was rummaging in a storage closet next to the HR office, searching for some old company records from a decade prior. He was supposed to retrieve data on a previous merger. Most of those dusty binders hadn't been touched in years. He opened boxes, flipping through documents. Then he stumbled across a smaller box, unlabeled, shoved in a corner. He tugged it out, thinking it might hold something valuable. Inside were personal items that must have belonged to a former employee or founder, perhaps. He found an old photograph with curling edges. It looked like it was taken in the late 1980s, an older man standing next to a little girl with braids, no older than 8 or 9. They were in front of a suburban home, smiling. The man had the same last name as the founder of this company. Daniel recognized the face from older archives. Under the photograph was a letter, carefully folded. Daniel skimmed it, seeing references to a hidden adoption. The child must never know. Circumstances demand secrecy. His pulse quickened. He recognized the signature of the founder. This was something personal, not meant to be in these archives. It sparked a memory, rumors he'd once heard about a hush-hush adoption within the founder's extended family. The details were murky. Why was this box hidden away and not returned to the rightful owners? He was about to put the items back when his eyes fell on the little girl's face again. Something about her eyes. They were bright and determined. It struck him like a thunderbolt. She looked uncannily like Ava. The shape of the eyes, the gentle slope of the nose. The child in the picture could be Ava's twin at that age, except Ava would be 30 now. That photograph had to be decades old. Was it possible the child in the photo was Ava's mother, or a relative? His heart hammered. If the founder had orchestrated a secret adoption in the family line, had that child grown up and had children of her own? Was Ava the descendant of someone connected to the founder's family? This wasn't mere speculation. It felt like a key to the intangible connection he'd sensed. What if Ava was the granddaughter or daughter of someone vital to the company's early days? He searched the rest of the box, finding a small envelope with scribbled handwriting, to be delivered only if necessary. Inside, there was a note referencing the same child, along with an older family photo featuring the founder, the man from the original picture, and a woman who looked like the child's mother. The names were partially visible in cursive. Bernadette, my beloved daughter, must remain protected from. The rest was unreadable, the ink too faded. Daniel carefully put everything back and took the entire box to his office. His mind spun. If Ava was connected to the founder's family, this was huge. It meant she might be the rightful heir to something, possibly stock shares or at least a piece of the legacy. He felt a pang of conflict. Should he tell her? Was it even certain? He needed more evidence. But how did he get it without crossing boundaries? The next day, Daniel found himself in the break room around lunchtime. Ava entered looking exhausted, yet she smiled politely when she spotted him. "Hello, Mr. Hampton," she said, a bit wary. He'd insisted she call him Daniel in the past, but she always reverted to formality in the office. "Hey, Ava, everything going well?" She nodded. "Just busy, but it's good. I'm grateful for the job." He cleared his throat. "Do you have a moment to talk?" "I have something I'd like to discuss, in private." Her eyes flickered with apprehension. She set down her coffee. "Sure." They stepped into an empty side office. He closed the door, then hesitated. How did one broach such a topic? He decided to start gently. "This might be odd," he began, "but do you happen to know much about your family history? Your grandparents, anything like that?" She blinked, obviously not expecting the question. "Why would you ask that?" His voice lowered, cautious. "I came across some historical records tied to the company's founder. Your name, your face, there might be a connection." "A connection? How?" He explained haltingly that the founder's extended family once had a child who was given up or hidden away due to complicated circumstances. He suspected that child might be Ava's mother or grandmother. He carefully left out the part about secret notes referencing hush-hush adoptions. He didn't want to overwhelm her. Ava's complexion paled. "That's..." "No, I don't know. My mother never spoke about her family. She died when I was a teenager. I was shuffled between foster homes. I've never known any grandparents." She paused, eyes growing distant. I only have a single faded photo of my mother when she was young, but it's not labeled. She always seemed so sad when I asked about her parents. I never pressed her." Daniel felt sympathy flood him. "I'm sorry." She nodded gratefully, but her brow furrowed. "Why do you ask? Am I in trouble or something?" "No, no," he said quickly. "You're not in trouble. I just thought you should know there might be a chance you have ties to this company's founder's family. It's only a theory. I can show you a picture I found. Maybe you can see if the child in it resembles your mother. It might give you some answers, or maybe I'm way off." She swallowed, eyes glistening with confusion and hope. "I'm not sure I want to know," she admitted. Then, after a beat, "But maybe I do." Mm. When he showed her the photograph in his office, her reaction was immediate. She gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Tears sprang to her eyes. "That's my mother," she whispered. I recognize her expression. She always had that same smile when she talked about daisies. I can't believe this." She stared at the picture as though it might vanish. "How can this be here? Why did you say the founder was involved in some hush-hush adoption?" Daniel nodded gently. "Yes, though the details are unclear. There's a letter. It references the child not knowing their true lineage for safety or something along those lines." Ava shook her head. "This is insane. My mother never imagined I'd be working here of all places." Daniel felt a tingling at the base of his neck. The sense of destiny was palpable. "There might be more to your heritage than you realize." She closed her eyes. "I have so many questions. Why was she hidden? Why did she never share this with me?" Heavy silence fell, thick with unspoken realities. Daniel gently set a hand on her shoulder. "We can figure this out. If you're comfortable, we can try to dig up more records. The founder passed away years ago, but the legal archives might have details. And if this is true, you might have a right to some part of this company's legacy." She let out a shaky laugh. "I'm just a single mom trying to pay the rent. This is bigger than I can handle. We'll do it one step at a time." Her eyes flickered to his, filled with gratitude. "Why are you helping me? You could have just kept this to yourself, or fired me, or done nothing." He hesitated. "I'm helping you because it's the right thing to do, and because from the moment I saw you, I couldn't shake the feeling that you belonged here more than just as an employee." She nodded slowly, wiping tears with the back of her hand. "Thank you." Over the next week, they set out on a discreet investigation. Daniel used his executive privileges to access old company records that weren't public. Some were incomplete or damaged. Nonetheless, they unearthed a hidden trove of documents that confirmed the founder had a daughter born outside of marriage, whose existence was concealed due to inheritance disputes. That daughter apparently was given to a distant cousin to raise. The arrangement was secretive, no official adoption records, just hush money and confidentiality agreements. When Ava saw the name of the adoptive cousin, her voice trembled. "That's my grandmother," she said. I recognized the name from an old scrapbook. It all lined up. Piece by piece, a story emerged. The founder had a child with a woman he loved but never married. The woman was from a humble background. The founder's family threatened scandal and financial ruin. So the child was quietly placed in someone else's home. Generations passed, and the secret never came to light, until now. For Ava, the revelation was staggering. It meant she was, by blood, related to the founder of the very company where she'd just been hired. It meant she'd unknowingly walked through the same halls once strolled by a man who might have been her great-grandfather. The knowledge both thrilled and terrified her. Daniel was there every step, guiding her through the labyrinth of legal documents and genealogical charts. He felt protective of her, both as her CEO and as someone personally invested in her well-being. He wasn't entirely sure why he'd become so consumed by her quest, but he couldn't resist. Something about her vulnerability pulled at him, and he sensed that, beyond the genealogical bombshell, there was more to Ava than even she realized. The tension between them grew. Late nights found them combing through records on Daniel's office desk. She'd share stories of her mother's heartbreak and her own journey, raising a son alone without any family to lean on. He shared glimpses of his childhood, how he'd lost his father young and had been mentored by the founder in a roundabout way. The founder had seen promise in him and nurtured him into the role of CEO. It was an odd parallel. The founder who had once hidden a blood relative had essentially raised an outsider, Daniel, to helm the company. And now, the real heir had walked in through the front door, unknowingly seeking a job in her own rightful kingdom. Eventually, the burden of secrecy wore on Ava. She confided in Daniel that she was petrified of how this might change her life. What if the board discovered she was a missing piece of the founder's legacy? Would they try to buy her off? Would she lose the normalcy she'd just begun to build for her little boy? She didn't want to become a pawn in corporate politics or inheritance battles, and she certainly didn't want to be thrust into some spotlight she'd never asked for. One night, Daniel sat across from her in his office, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She looked small and weary, yet there was a fiery determination in her eyes. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. She exhaled. "I'm overwhelmed. I have to pick up my son from daycare in an hour, and I'm supposed to tell him what? Mommy might be an heiress. This is so surreal." I barely have enough to pay for groceries, and now I'm diving into corporate archives that suggest I might have a legal claim to, I don't even know how much. He nodded empathetically. The value isn't what matters, it's the truth. You deserve to know your origins, and if it grants you and your child some security, you should at least consider it. She stared at her lap. I don't want to become someone else's problem or create drama, but my son, maybe I owe it to him to explore this. If there's a chance to give him a better life, how can I ignore it? He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes before pulling back, self-conscious. I'll stand by you no matter what. I'll help you figure out how to handle this in a way that doesn't compromise who you are. Her eyes glistened with tears, and for a split second they forgot about the office hierarchy. The air crackled with unspoken emotion. She reached out impulsively, gave his hand a gentle squeeze. A current of energy passed between them, undeniable, confusing, but warm. Thank you, she whispered. He swallowed, heart pounding. Anytime. As days turned to weeks, Ava's work performance didn't falter. In fact, she seemed more motivated than ever, determined to prove she deserved her spot. She remained discreet about her discovery, telling no one except Daniel, but the secret weighed on her. She was determined to meet with a lawyer, to see if there were any official channels for her claim, if she indeed wanted to pursue it. She wasn't after money for herself, she insisted, only stability for her son, and maybe answers to the questions that haunted her entire life. In the midst of this turmoil, something else began to blossom between her and Daniel. Late-night research sessions turned into deep conversations. He saw the warmth in her eyes when she mentioned her child, the passion when she spoke of wanting to break the cycle of poverty. She saw his vulnerability in moments when he admitted how lonely it could be at the top, how he felt a personal responsibility for every employee's well-being. They found common ground in their struggles, albeit from drastically different worlds. It was unspoken, but their connection felt like a spark in the darkness. Neither dared act on it, given the professional line between them, yet the tension thickened, unintentional glances lingered, casual touches burned. Eventually, it became impossible to pretend they were just CEO and employee. One evening, Daniel offered to drive her home after a marathon session in the archives. She hesitated but finally agreed. Taking public transport was too exhausting after such a long day. In his luxury car, she sat stiffly, gazing out at the city lights passing by. You don't have to do this, she said softly. I can manage the subway. He offered a reassuring smile. It's fine, really. They drove in silence for a while. She finally spoke in a brittle tone as if wrestling with herself. I'm not used to accepting help. People have disappointed me a lot in life, and I know that you're different, but it's hard to let my guard down. He nodded. I understand. She studied him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. I believe you do. When they reached her modest apartment complex, a stark contrast to his own upscale world, she turned to him. The air was thick with unsaid words. She wanted to thank him properly, but the words seemed too small for everything he'd done. He opened his mouth, maybe to wish her good night, but something in her eyes stopped him, and before either of them could think, they leaned in. Their lips met in a brief, gentle kiss that felt like a hush in the storm of their lives. They pulled apart, breathless, eyes wide. It was wrong, maybe, unprofessional, but the moment was honest. She opened the car door, heart hammering. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. She slipped out into the night. He watched her go, mind spinning. He knew the complications that lay ahead, but that single tender moment overshadowed them, at least for that night. The next morning, they avoided each other's gaze in the office, tension brimming. There was work to be done, urgent emails, phone calls, staff updates. As the hours ticked by, Daniel wrestled with guilt. Had he crossed a line? He was her employer, she was vulnerable. But everything about their connection felt genuine, not exploitative. Still, the code of conduct ran through his mind and he felt conflicted. Ava, on the other hand, was worried she'd put her job and her newly gained stability at risk. She reasoned that maybe it was just an impulsive moment. She should focus on her responsibilities, on her child's future. She couldn't afford to lose everything over a kiss. Yet every time she passed Daniel's office, a flush crept up her neck, remembering the warmth of his lips on hers. 3 days later, the bomb dropped. Daniel was in his office, finishing a conference call, when the door flew open. An older board member, Ms. Hastings, barged in without knocking. Daniel ended the call abruptly, frowning. Ms. Hastings, what's the matter? She slammed a file onto his desk. I've been hearing whispers about certain archived documents, about a possible heir to the founder, and I hear you've been personally involved in digging them up. Daniel's blood chilled. Where did you get that? She narrowed her gaze. We have ways of finding out. This is potentially catastrophic for the company. If a new heir appears, it could overturn stock allocations, board structure, everything. This could send our investors into a frenzy. Why have you kept this from us? Daniel fought to keep his composure. I was verifying the facts. I didn't want to start rumors without proof. And the person in question doesn't necessarily want to make any formal claim. It's complicated. Ms. Hastings pressed her lips into a thin line. Well, it's too late. The board expects answers. If there's someone out there with a legitimate claim, this entire company could be at risk, our shares, our leadership. We need to know who it is and what they intend to do. Daniel's jaw tightened. She's done nothing wrong. This is her birthright, if it's even legitimate. You can't blame her for that. Oh, I'm not blaming her, Ms. Hastings said coolly, but I am blaming you for withholding information. The board demands a meeting. You'd better bring her. If she's truly the founder's descendant, we need to determine next steps immediately. By noon, Ava was in Daniel's office, pale and trembling, reading the email summoning her to a special board session. She felt nauseous. They want to meet me? Why? Because they know about you, Daniel said, voice taut. Somehow, word got out. The board is concerned about legal ramifications, potential inheritance disputes, or even a seat on the board for you since you'd be in the direct lineage. She closed her eyes. I never asked for this, I just wanted a job. He gently squeezed her shoulder. I know, but we can't hide it now, we have to face them. A shudder passed through her. I don't have a lawyer, I don't have anything. What if they tear me apart? What if they try to buy me off or threaten me? His eyes hardened. They won't threaten you, not while I'm here, and if they try, we'll fight back. She fought tears. I can't do this, my son, I should have never gone digging. He took her hands, ignoring the formal setting. Look at me, you have every right to be here. If you want to walk away, I'll respect that, and I'll do my best to protect you. But I think you deserve to have your story heard. This is your life, you're not just some footnote. She gazed at him, seeing her own fear reflected in his expression. Slowly, she nodded. All right, I'll do it. Later that afternoon, Ava stood before the board in a gleaming, glass-walled conference room that overlooked the city. The board members, a half-circle of stern faces, peered at her as though she were an anomaly. Daniel sat beside her, a silent pillar of support. Ms. Hastings led the questioning. Miss Cooper, she began with practiced politeness. We have reason to believe you may be the direct descendant of our founder, Mr. Winston Caldwell. Is that correct? Ava's throat was dry. Yes, ma'am. Based on evidence we found, it seems my mother was his granddaughter. Another board member chimed in, pushing his glasses higher on his nose. Were you aware of this connection before applying here? No, Ava managed. I only found out a few weeks ago. It was a shock. Murmurs rippled through the group. Ms. Hastings leaned forward. And do you intend to pursue legal action for any kind of inheritance claim? Are you seeking control or shares of the company? Ava shook her head emphatically. I don't know. This is all new to me. I'm not after money. I just wanted a job to support my child. A few board members exchanged skeptical glances. That may be, Ms. Hastings pressed, but we need clarity. You are, in fact, Mr. Caldwell's rightful heir. You could claim a significant portion of the company's outstanding shares. That would drastically shift the balance of power. Do you realize that? Ava swallowed. I guess so, but I'm not trying to cause a shift in power. I only learned about this by accident. The board seemed unconvinced. Another member, a stern older man, cleared his throat. You must understand our concern. The founder's shares were distributed among certain trusts upon his passing. If you have a legitimate claim, it could reopen those trusts. This isn't a simple matter. The media could become involved. Investors could panic. Ava's voice wobbled. I never wanted that. The older man nodded. That may be, but it's the reality. We need to know if you're going to stake a formal claim. She cast a helpless glance at Daniel, who spoke up, tone firm. We haven't decided anything yet. We only just uncovered these documents. It's not as though Ava has an army of lawyers behind her. She's entitled to take her time. Ms. Hastings pursed her lips. Yes, but the board also has an obligation to protect the company from instability. We can't simply ignore a claim like this. We might propose a settlement, an arrangement where you, Miss Cooper, relinquish any claims in exchange for a lump sum or an ongoing stipend. Ava's shoulders tensed. Idea of signing away her heritage felt wrong, but the tension in the room was suffocating. She wanted to scream that she never asked to be part of their corporate chess game. Instead, she took a shaky breath. I'd need to think about it, she said quietly. I'm not prepared to make a decision here and now. Ms. Hastings nodded curtly. Understood, but time is of the essence. The longer this is unresolved, the riskier it becomes for the company. We'll give you 2 weeks to decide on your course of action. Daniel clenched his jaw but said nothing, though he loathed their pushy attitude. Ava mustered a polite nod, heart pounding, and just like that, the meeting ended, leaving a swirl of conflicting emotions in her wake. She and Daniel walked together down the corridor in silence. The entire building felt cold. Finally, Ava exhaled, tears threatening to spill. I feel like I'm drowning. They want me to give up any claim, or else risk what? A legal battle. Daniel slid an arm around her shoulders, guiding her into a quiet alcove. You don't have to do anything rash. They can't force you to sign away your birthright. You can get legal counsel. She shook her head, voice trembling. That costs money I don't have, and I don't want the media hounding me. My son is only 5. I want to protect him. He cupped her cheek gently, trying to calm her. We'll find a way. You can take a settlement if that feels right for you. Or you can fight for your inheritance. Either way, you decide, not them. She nodded, though her anxiety was palpable. Thank you, she whispered. I just wish none of this had happened. It's too big. He drew her into a comforting hug, ignoring any prying eyes that might see. You're not alone. The following week was a nightmare of clandestine phone calls and hushed conversations. Ava tried to perform her regular duties, but the office buzzed with speculation. Word traveled fast in corporate circles, and soon gossip circulated that the new admin might be some hidden heiress. People whispered behind her back. Some acted overly friendly, fishing for information. Others treated her with open resentment, as though she'd scammed her way in. Ava found it suffocating, but she endured, focusing on her real responsibilities. She had a son to care for, rent to pay, and a life to maintain. Meanwhile, Daniel worked behind the scenes to shield her from the board's more aggressive attempts to force a quick resolution. He used his authority to keep them at bay while she weighed her options. One evening, as Ava was leaving, she found Miss Hastings waiting by the elevators. The older woman's expression was neutral but not unkind. She stepped in beside Ava when the doors opened, and they rode down in tense silence until Miss Hastings finally spoke. I hope you realize we're not trying to bully you. We're just protecting the company. We didn't expect, well, any of this. Ava said nothing, her eyes fixed on the descending floor numbers. Miss Hastings sighed. For what it's worth, I'm sorry you were thrust into this so abruptly. I remember Winston Caldwell. He was a complicated man. If he left a secret legacy, I'm sure it was out of fear of scandal, fear of losing everything he built. Ava's throat tightened. Well, he already lost the chance to know his family, didn't he? Miss Hastings gave a sad nod. Indeed, when the elevator reached the ground floor, Miss Hastings turned to Ava. I just wanted to say that if you ever want to talk, I'm here. Despite the board's tough stance, not all of us are against you. But remember, time is running short on this matter. She departed, leaving Ava more conflicted than ever. Outside, Ava waited for the bus, hugging her coat tight against the evening chill. She thought about her mother, how she'd struggled, how they'd moved from one shabby apartment to another, and now the knowledge that all along they had this unstoppable legacy behind them. It was almost too cruel to bear. She boarded the bus, weaving through the crowd to find a seat. As the city lights streaked past, she couldn't hold back tears any longer. They slid down her cheeks silently amid the hum of public transit. Her phone buzzed, Daniel texting, probably to check on her. She wasn't ready to talk, so she let it buzz. She needed a moment to process her reality. When she got home, her son rushed into her arms, giggling about a drawing he made at daycare. She set aside her troubles for his sake, hugging him as though he was her only lifeline in the storm. In that moment, she knew no amount of money or power could replace the simplicity of that bond. Her choices weren't just about her. They were about him and the future he deserved. Meanwhile, Daniel worked late in his office, reviewing some final acquisition documents, yet he couldn't focus. His thoughts strayed to Ava. He worried about her emotional state, about how she was handling the pressure. He knew the board's ultimatum loomed over her. Part of him wanted to urge her to claim her inheritance, to take a rightful place at the helm. Another part wanted to protect her from the chaos such a move would unleash. He also felt a tug of guilt regarding their personal connection. Some nights he'd replay that kiss in his car, the look of vulnerability in her eyes, the taste of her lips. He wanted more, but the timing was awful, the circumstances fraught with conflict of interest. Still, the pull was undeniable, and he couldn't deny how each day he grew more attached to her spirit, her resilience, and her heart. Days passed. Ava finally decided to seek some legal advice, borrowing money from a small personal loan to afford a consultation. The lawyer listened, wide-eyed, as she explained her background and the newly discovered documents. He confirmed that if she was indeed a direct descendant of Winston Caldwell, she had a legitimate right to contest the distribution of shares. But it could be a lengthy legal battle, involving attorneys from both the company and the trusts holding Caldwell's estate. She might receive a substantial settlement or partial ownership. Alternatively, she could relinquish her claim and sign an agreement with the board. When she left the law office, her head spun. She couldn't imagine fighting a high-powered legal team, but signing away her rights entirely also felt wrong. She wanted to preserve the truth of her ancestry. So the lawyer suggested a compromise: negotiate for a fair settlement that acknowledges her lineage but doesn't upend the corporate structure. She could maintain a minority stake in the company or some ongoing compensation that would ensure her child's future. She mulled it over. Could that be her solution? Guarantee her son's well-being without fueling a corporate war? She had only a few days left before the board's deadline. She scheduled another meeting with the lawyer. Her plan was to draft a proposal and present it to Daniel first, hoping he'd help her navigate the board's decision-makers. The next day, a Saturday, Daniel asked Ava if she'd meet him at a small coffee shop downtown to talk away from office politics. She agreed, leaving her son with a trusted neighbor. She arrived to find Daniel seated at a corner table, jacket removed, his button-down sleeves rolled to his elbows. He stood when she entered, and they exchanged a brief, slightly awkward hug. Once they'd sat with their coffees, the conversation took a personal turn. She told him about her lawyer's advice. He listened intently, occasionally nodding. "That sounds reasonable," he said. "If you want, I can help present that proposal to the board." She clutched her coffee cup. "I'd appreciate that. I just want my life back, but better. For my son, you know?" He looked at her, his voice gentle. "I do, and I'll do whatever I can to help." Silence fell between them, thick with unspoken words about more than business. She studied the way the morning light caught the hint of stubble on his jaw, how his eyes reflected earnest concern. He was about to speak again when her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, the neighbor, her stomach lurched. "Hello," she said anxiously. The neighbor sounded panicked. "Ava, I'm so sorry, but your son fell off the playground slide. He might have twisted his ankle. We're on our way to the hospital to get it checked out." Ava's heart raced. "What hospital? I'll be right there." She hung up, eyes wide with worry. Daniel tensed. "Is he hurt badly?" "I'm not sure," she said, grabbing her purse. "He fell. They're taking him to County General." Without hesitation, Daniel stood. "I'm driving you." She didn't argue. They rushed out, leaving their coffees half finished. Daniel's car sped through weekend traffic, and she gripped the seat, fear clawing at her. Her little boy was all she had. She could handle any corporate drama, but the idea of him being hurt made her stomach churn. In the hospital waiting room, she paced, anxiously biting her lip. Daniel stayed by her side, a calming presence despite the tension radiating from her. Finally, the neighbor emerged with her son in tow, his leg wrapped in a temporary brace. He had a few tears still clinging to his cheeks, but managed a brave smile when he saw his mom. She dropped to her knees, hugging him carefully. "Oh, my baby, are you okay?" He nodded, sniffling. "It just hurts a little." The doctor explained it was a mild sprain, not a fracture, and recommended rest and a follow-up in a week. Ava exhaled a wave of relief, hugging him tight. Daniel remained in the background, letting her have the moment, but her son noticed him, eyes curious. "Mommy, who's that?" the boy asked. Ava glanced at Daniel. Her cheeks reddened slightly. "He's a friend, sweetie. He helped me get here." The boy nodded, evidently satisfied. Daniel crouched down to his level, offering a friendly smile. "I'm Daniel. I'm glad you're okay. That was quite a scare." The child inspected him with wide eyes, then said shyly, "Thank you for helping my mom." Daniel chuckled softly. "Anytime." Later, Daniel drove them home, the boy safely strapped into the back seat. Ava glanced back repeatedly, motherly concern overshadowing everything else. Once they reached her building, Daniel insisted on helping carry her son up the stairs. Sitting him on the couch, Ava instructed him to keep his leg elevated. She got him a glass of water, then turned to Daniel. "Thank you," she said in a hushed tone, "for everything today and everything else." He shrugged softly, his gaze falling on the boy happily occupied with a simple toy. "I'm just glad he's all right." She led Daniel to the tiny kitchen area, away from her son's earshot. "I owe you so much," she whispered. "Even before this, you've changed my life in ways I can't even describe." He reached for her hand, gently. "Ava, you don't owe me anything." She felt tears threaten again. The emotional roller coaster was almost too much. Suddenly, she stood on her tiptoes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I shouldn't," he turned, meeting her lips in a slow, tender kiss that was both an apology and an affirmation of everything they felt. It lingered for a moment in the stillness of her cramped kitchen, two worlds colliding in the simplest, most profound way. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "This is so complicated," she breathed. His hand lightly cupped her jaw. "We'll figure it out." She smiled through tears, then stepped back, remembering her son in the next room. Life didn't pause for romance. There were real concerns, real responsibilities, but for that fleeting instant, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of happiness, no matter how tangled their circumstances. Monday came, and with it, the board's looming deadline. Ava and Daniel prepared to present her proposal at a special session. She would request a modest minority stake, enough to acknowledge her lineage and secure her son's future, without destabilizing the company. If the board accepted, she'd waive any further claims. In an ideal world, it would be a fair, peaceful resolution. Daniel coached her on how to present her case. He arranged a meeting with Ms. Hastings beforehand, trying to gauge the board's stance. Ms. Hastings admitted that some members might push back, especially those who feared any shift in shared distribution. But a compromise could still be reached, she said, if Ava was genuine. Ava sat at her desk, nerves on edge. She typed up a concise document with her request. She wore her best outfit, which was still modest compared to the power suits of the corporate elite. But Daniel assured her that her authenticity was more compelling than any tailored ensemble. Finally, the hour arrived. She and Daniel walked side by side into the large conference room. The board members were already seated, their expressions a mix of skepticism and guarded interest. The tension was palpable, but Ava steadied herself. She had survived worse in life than a room full of executives. Ms. Hastings opened the meeting. Miss Cooper, we understand you have a proposal to present. The floor is yours. Ava rose, swallowing hard. She clutched her typed statement, forcing her voice to stay level. Members of the board, she began, I never imagined I'd stand here as anything other than a new hire in need of a job. Discovering my connection to Winston Caldwell was a revelation I didn't seek. I understand your concerns about stability, and I have no intention of disrupting the company. However, I also believe in honoring the truth and ensuring a better future for my child. She laid out her proposal, a small but fair percentage of shares placed in a trust for her and her son, with no voting rights that could upset current leadership. In exchange, she would formally recognize she had no further claims. A hush fell. Then the board members murmured among themselves, flipping through her written proposal. Some frowned. A few nodded thoughtfully. Ms. Hastings glanced at Daniel, who gave a slight nod of support. Finally, the oldest board member, the stern man from before, spoke. This is not an unreasonable request. It avoids a public spectacle and ensures you receive acknowledgement. However, I imagine we'll need some modifications. We can't just hand over shares without legal verification of your lineage. We'll require a thorough DNA test, historical documentation, everything above board. Ava's shoulders loosened slightly. I'm willing to comply. He nodded, but not unkindly. Very well. The board will need to confer with our legal counsel. We'll schedule another meeting next week. For now, we tentatively accept your proposal, pending verification. A wave of relief washed over her. This was as close to a win as she could hope for. She bowed her head. Thank you. Ms. Hastings offered a measured smile. Thank you, Miss Cooper, for your candor. With that, the meeting concluded. Ava exhaled shakily, tears of relief welling. Daniel gave her a discreet thumbs up. For a moment, it felt like the weight of the world had lifted. Over the next week, the DNA test was administered by a reputable lab, and it confirmed Ava's direct descendants. Legal documents were drafted, hammered out by lawyers on both sides. Terms were negotiated. She'd receive a minority stake, placed in a trust that guaranteed a moderate but life-changing income, plus medical benefits for her and her son. In return, she'd have no active role in company governance, no press conference, nothing that would cause market turbulence. She was simply recognized and respected. On Friday, the final signatures were made in a private session. Daniel stood by Ava, proud and somewhat protective. She scribbled her name on the dotted line, a swirl of emotions flooding her. It was done. The board officially welcomed her as a silent shareholder with familial ties to the founder. They expressed relief that the situation was resolved amicably. Ms. Hastings shook her hand warmly. Ava knew it was partly damage control, but still it felt momentous. Afterward in the corridor, Daniel caught her arm gently. You did it. She gazed up at him, eyes shimmering. We did it, she corrected, voice thick with gratitude. I couldn't have done any of this without you. He smiled, a real, unguarded smile. You're stronger than you think. You would have managed somehow. But I'm glad I could help. They didn't speak about the personal bond between them, or the night at her apartment, or the stolen kisses, but the warmth in their eyes spoke volumes. The question of whether they could truly merge their two lives, boss and employee, corporate titan and secret heiress, single mom and childless mogul, lingered. But in that moment, resolution flickered like a promise. A month passed. Ava's life stabilized. She kept her administrative role by choice. The board initially offered her a position in public relations or philanthropy, but she declined, wanting to earn her place on her own terms. Slowly, the gossip died down as employees turned their attention to other matters. Her finances improved drastically. She moved her son into a safer neighborhood near a better school. The trust's funds paid off her debts, and for the first time in her life, she breathed easily when the rent came due. Daniel and Ava navigated their personal connection with caution. They had dinner a few times, heart-to-heart conversations about life, love, and responsibilities. He met her son again under more relaxed circumstances. A gentle fondness grew, though they still worried about crossing lines in the workplace. Officially, they told no one, but close observers might have guessed something was happening between them. A knowing look here, a shared smile there. Ms. Hastings subtly teased Daniel one day in passing, saying, "So I see you and Miss Cooper have reached an understanding in more ways than one." He only replied with a cryptic shrug and moved on. Officially, they remained discreet, and then came the final piece. One evening, after a hectic day, Daniel invited Ava to his penthouse apartment to discuss a new philanthropic initiative the board wanted her to join. She arrived, a little awestruck by the panoramic view of the city from his windows. Her son was with a babysitter for the evening. It was quiet, just the two of them. They sat on a plush couch, documents about a potential charity partnership spread out on a coffee table. They tried to talk business, but the air bristled with personal tension. Eventually, Daniel set the papers aside. Ava, he said, his tone soft. We've been through so much in such a short time. I want to be honest with you, and I hope you can be honest with me. Her heart fluttered. "Go on," he inhaled slowly. "I'm drawn to you in ways that aren't just about your lineage or my sense of duty. Care about you deeply. I think about you constantly, if you and your son are okay, if you're happy. And I'd like to see if we can build something real beyond this corporate environment." She bit her lip, eyes shimmering. "I feel the same," she admitted. "But I'm terrified. This is new, and you're my boss. How would that even work?" He reached for her hands, rubbing his thumb across her knuckles. "If we do this, we'll handle it carefully. We'll talk to HR, make sure we're above board. If it means restructuring your position so there's no direct report conflict, I'm willing to do that. I don't want you to feel compromised." She squeezed his hand back. "Thank you, but I also don't want you to sacrifice your reputation or the company's best interests." He smiled. "You're part of this company now, too. And for the record, I don't care about gossip or rumors. I care about building a life with someone who inspires me. That's you." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of hope. "I've never had anyone fight for me like that," she whispered. "My whole life, it's been just me and my little boy. To have someone stand by us, it means everything." He leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that felt like the gentle close of one chapter and the bright opening of another. They spent the evening talking about possibilities, how to blend their worlds, how to protect her child from unnecessary scrutiny, how to navigate any corporate backlash. There were no easy answers, but they had each other, and that seemed enough. In the weeks that followed, they quietly made their relationship known to a select few, ensuring professional boundaries were maintained. Ava transitioned to a different team within the company, reporting to someone other than Daniel. The board, while initially startled, accepted it after a few private conversations, especially since Ava's silent stake in the company was already established. They saw no reason to alienate a person of her significance, and Daniel was too valuable a CEO to alienate over personal matters. All the while, Ava's confidence grew. She took on new tasks, honed her skills, and found ways to contribute meaningfully to the company that, in many ways, was her birthright. She also took pride in providing her son with stability and opportunities she once believed were unattainable. The memory of living paycheck to paycheck, the endless worry, those ghosts lingered, but they no longer had the power to chain her. Daniel, for his part, felt a sense of wholeness he never knew was missing. He'd always been successful, always at the top of his game, but real companionship, real warmth, those had eluded him. Now sharing a quiet dinner with Ava and her son felt more satisfying than any high-stakes corporate deal ever had. He found himself changing in subtle ways, being more patient, more empathetic, understanding that success wasn't just about numbers, but also about the human connections he nurtured. One sunny afternoon, about a year after Ava first stepped into that glimmering tower, she sat in Daniel's office, though now it was more of a personal visit than a professional one. They were discussing a charity gala benefiting single parents that the company planned to sponsor. Ava was set to be a spokesperson, her story serving as an inspiration to others. She gazed around, remembering her first day, the fear and awe she felt stepping into this place. A lump formed in her throat as she turned to Daniel. "If someone told me a year ago that I'd be here, not just as an employee, but as well as family, in a way I would have laughed in their face." Daniel smiled. "Life can be unpredictable. Sometimes it brings the people who need each other the most together in ways none of us ever imagined." She nodded, eyes shining. "Never imagined," she echoed, a whisper that held both gratitude and wonder. He rose, walking around the desk to stand beside her, then gently wrapped his arms around her. Through the window, the city skyline stretched out, a testament to success and ambition. But between them, it was just two hearts forging a new future, shaped by struggle, discovery, and love. She felt the comforting weight of his embrace, inhaled his familiar scent, and closed her eyes. The path had been winding, filled with secrets, revelations, and challenges, but it led her here, to a place of belonging she never thought she'd find. She was still a mother, still fighting for a better life, but now she wasn't alone. She had a partner in every sense of the word. And perhaps that was the greatest reward of all, knowing that despite the odds, she'd found love, family, and a chance to write her own story, free from the chains of an unknown past. As Daniel held her close, she remembered the moment she'd first stepped into the HR department, nerves threatening to devour her. How everything changed the day the CEO recognized something in her that neither of them could articulate at the time. And how in the end it wasn't about money or power or status. It was about connection, identity, and the power of compassion. The shocking secret had propelled them both into a journey of self-discovery, unraveling hidden truths and forging unbreakable bonds. She was still the poor single mom in some people's eyes, but that label no longer weighed her down, because now she was also a beloved partner, a respected shareholder, a valued employee, and most importantly, a mother carving a bright path for her child. If you found this story moving and want to see more inspiring narratives and motivational content, Subscribe to my YouTube channel for regular updates and real-life tales of transformation and hope.